In this video, I will show how to reassemble the struts on your 1984 through 1987 Pontiac Fiero. This is simply an assembly video. I won't be going into any of the details of disassembly or cleaning. Here are the tools that I use for this assembly. A 1/2-inch impact gun, a set of impact sockets, a set of McPherson strut spring compression tools, a pair of vice grips. You can rent a compression tool from many auto parts stores. Check your local store for more detail if they offer this program. Here are the parts. A strut. I wanted KYB struts, but these were unavailable at the moment. I went with Monroe struts. Here is a replacement bellows. It fits on top of the piston. I reused the spring pads. These simply act as a cushion between the strut and the spring. I've seen people use fuel line of the correct inner diameter. The important thing is that the spring is insulated from the strut or spring cap. Here is the spring cap. It fits on top of the spring and below the top hat. This is a replacement top hat. This part acts as both a bearing and a bushing. The originals are at least 35 years old. It's time for new ones. This is the original spring. It was sandblasted and powder coated. I considered painting, but this is going to go through a lot of abuse, and I wanted this to last for at least another 35 years. And, finally, the hardware. A cap which belongs on top of the bellows, a cup washer which belongs on top of the assembly, and a brand new nut which belongs to the top of the assembly. Okay, let's get to the assembly. Here you can see me placing the compression tool. Then, I compressed each side, checking the bolts to make sure there's enough clearance on each side. If there isn't clearance, you can't put on the spring cap. Since I assembled one of these just yesterday, I got to learn the best position to compress the springs. I wanted to be able to place the clamps lower on the spring for ease of removal afterward, but that did not allow me to compress the spring enough to assemble the strut. Here's some footage of me checking the clearance between the bolts and the top of the spring. If the bolts are too close to the top of the spring, you can't place the spring cap. Once those are in place, the spring cap and top hat were assembled and set on top. The threaded part of the piston comes up through the top hat. You'll know if the spring was compressed enough if you can see all of the threads. I set the bellows and top plate on the strut here, but I should have waited until I put the spring on first. I had to fight it a little bit on the smaller part of the spring. I discovered that I didn't compress the spring enough, so I tightened the compression bolt some more. The dishwasher was set on top, and then the top nut. I used a vice grips to hold the nut still, and a 10mm socket was placed on top of the piston. It's important that you turn this to the left, otherwise you will loosen rather than tighten the assembly. What I hadn't noticed when I was putting the assembly together was that the strut cocked a lot. You can see me looking at the assembly in disbelief. I had to loosen the top nut to reposition. Here's where things started getting a little sketchy. Remember how I said that I learned a lot about the process because I'd done it just yesterday? Well, that's true, but I didn't realize when I was putting things together how close those tolerances were. The bolt that allows me to remove the compression tool is behind the shield. I couldn't remove it like this. The solution was to either completely undo it, reposition the compression tool, or use a convincing device to attempt to slide it into a position in which I could access. I opted for percussive maintenance. Once the compression tool slid enough to get the socket on, I removed that part of the bracket. Then, I used percussive maintenance to slide the clamp around the circumference of the spring. I would have liked to simply pop it off, but there simply wasn't any room to do so. If any of you could tell me an easier way to remove it, please tell me in the comments below. And there you have it, one fully assembled Pontiac Fiero strut unit. If you like what you've seen here, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.